Good morning everyone. Today's topic that we are going to have is B. Wordsworth. B stands for Black Wordsworth. An imaginary poet created by V.S. Naipaul. The full name of V.S. Naipaul is Sir Vidyadhar Suraj Prasad Naipaul. He received Nobel Prize. He was awarded with Nobel Prize in 2001. Okay. This story is about a very small boy, a young fellow and a poet. So here you go, let us see what is it. Three beggars called punctually every day at the hospitable house in Mayjewell Street, a very friendly house. At about 10, an Indian came in his dhoti and white jacket, and we poured a tin of rice into the sack he carried on his back. At 12, an old woman smoking a pipe came and she got a cent. At 2, a blind man led by a boy called for his penny. Sometime we had a rogue. Rogue means some fellow, reckless fellow. One day a man called and said he was hungry. We gave him a meal. He asked for a cigarette and would not go until we had lit it for him. That man never came again. The strangest caller came one afternoon at about 4 o'clock. I had come back from school and was in my home clothes. The man said to me, "Sonny, may I come inside your yard?" Yard means that house. Sonny stands for son. May I come inside your house? He was a small man and he was tightly dressed. He wore a hat, a white shirt and black trousers. I asked, "What you want?" He said, "I want to watch your bees." We had 4 small group plum trees and they were full of uninvited bees. He wants to see the bees. Little confusing you may call it. Okay, let us see what happens. I ran up the steps and shouted, "Ma, it have a man outside here and he says he want to watch the bees." You can see the grammatical mistakes in English. This is the Indianness attached to the very story. The poet has done this one, the author has done this one intentionally to add the smoke, the smack of flavor of Indianness in it. My mother came out, looked at the man and asked in an unfriendly way, "What do you want?" The man said, "I want to watch your bees." His English was so good. It did not sound natural and I could see my mother was worried. She said to me, "Stay here and watch him while he watched the bees." The man said, "Thank you, madam. You have done a good deed today." He spoke very slowly and correctly, and though every word was costing him money. He watched the bees, this man and I, for an hour, squatting near the palm trees. The man said, "I like watching bees, Sonny. Do you like watching bees?" Watching bees, not a business of everyone, not an act of everyone. Everyone cannot watch, observe the bees. Only a person with greater observation and a mind full of fertility can watch or look at this one. Next. I said, "I ain't have the time." He shook the head sadly and said, "That's what I do. I just watch. I can watch ants for days. Have you ever watched ants and scorpions and centipedes and congroses? Have you watched those?" That means he can look at these things for hours and hours. I shook my head, said, "What you does, mister?" "I'm a poet." I said, "A good poet." He said, "The greatest in the world." "What's your name?" "Mr. B. Wordsworth." B for Bill? "No, Black." "Black Wordsworth." "White Wordsworth was my brother. We share one heart. I can watch a small flower like the morning glory and cry." can see the flower and cry. He can feel the flower. Crying is not for sadness, but for feelings. I said, why you does cry? What is the reason of your crying? Why, boy, why? You will know when you grow up, you are a poet too, you know. And when you are a poet, you can cry for everything. I could not laugh. He said, you like your mother when she not beating me. He pulled out a printed sheet from his hip pocket and said, on this paper is the greatest poem about mother. And I am going to sell it to you at a bargain price for 4 cents only. I went inside and said, Ma, you want to buy a poetry for 4 cents? My mother said, tell that blasted man to haul his tail away from my yard, you dare. Throw that man out and tell him never to come here. B. Wordsworth said, it's a poet's tragedy. And he put the paper bag in his pocket. He did not seem to mind. I said, it's funny way to go around saying poetry like that. Only Calypsonians can do that sort of thing. A lot of people does buy. These Caribbean musicians, they play on the street and people buy their songs and the music. Next. He said, no one has yet bought a single copy. But why you does keep on going around then? He said, in this way I watch many things and I always hope to meet poets. I said, you really think I is a poet? You are good as me, he said. And when B. Wordsworth left, I prayed I would see him again. About a week later, coming back from school one afternoon, I met him at the corner of Meagle Street. He said, I have been waiting for you a long time. I said, you sell any poetry yet? He shook his head. He said, in my yard I have best mango tree in Port of Spain. And now the mangoes are ripe and red and very sweet and juicy. I have waited here for you to tell you this and to invite you to come and eat some of my mangoes. He lived in Alberto Street in one-roomed hut, placed right in the center of the Lord. The yard seemed all green. There was the big mango tree, there was a coconut tree, and there was a palm tree. The place looked wild, as though it was not in the city at all. You could not see all the big concrete houses in the street. He was right, the mangoes were sweet and juicy. I ate about 6 and the yellow mangoes juice ran down my arms to my elbow and down my mouth to my chin, and my shirt was stained. My mother said when I got home, where you was? You think you is a man now and could go all over the place. Go cut a wig for me. The English spoken by the poet in case of himself, the author, for himself or for his mother, that is impure English. Reason is very clear. The clear Indianness is added, the smell of Indianness is added in a very proper way. Next. She beat me rather badly and I ran out to the house swearing that I would never come back. I went to B. Wordsworth's house. I was so angry, my nose was bleeding. B. Wordsworth said, stop crying and we'll go for a walk. I stopped crying but I was breathing short. We went for a walk. He walked down St. Clair Avenue to the Savannah and we walked to the race course. B. Wordsworth said, now let us lie on the grass and look up at the sky. And I want you to think how far those stars are from us. So, once more I am saying, let us lie on the grass and look up at the sky, and I want you to think how far those stars are from us. I did as he told me, and I saw what he meant. I felt like nothing. And at the same time, I had never felt so big and great in my life. I forgot all my anger, all my tears, all my blows. When I said I was better, he began telling me the names of the stars, and I particularly remember the constellation of Orion the Hunter. Though I don't really know why I can spot Orion even today, but I have forgotten the rest. Then a light was flashed in our faces and we saw a policeman. We got up from the cars. The policeman said, "What are you doing here?" Wordsworth said, "I have been asking myself the same question for 40 years. What we are doing here on this earth?" We became friends, Wordsworth and I. He told me, "You must never tell anybody about me and about the mango tree and the coconut tree and the palm tree. You must keep that secret. If you tell anybody, I'll know because I am a poet." I gave him my word and I kept it. I liked his little room. It had no more furniture than George Ford's room. It looked cleaner and healthier, but also looked lonely. One day I asked him, "Mr. Wordsworth, why you does keep all this bush in your yard? And does make the place damp?" He said, "Listen, I will tell you a story. Once upon a time, a boy and a girl met each other and they fell in love. They loved each other so much, they got married. They were both poets. He loved words. She loved grass and flowers and trees. They lived happily in a single room, and then one day the girl poet said to the boy poet, 'We are going to have another poet in the family.' That means they will have a child in the family. But this poet was never born because the girl died and the young poet died with her inside her. The lady died with the baby without giving birth. And the girl's husband was very sad and he said he would never touch a thing in girl's garden. And so the garden remained and grew high and wide. It is the life story, autobiography of B. Wordsworth himself. I looked at B. Wordsworth and he told me his lovely story. He seemed to grow older. I understood his story. We went for a long walk together. We went to the botanical garden and rock gardens. We climbed Chancellor's Hill in the late afternoon, and watched the darkness fall on port of Spain, and watched the lights go on in the city and on the ships in the harbor. He did everything as though he were doing it for the first time in his life. He did everything as though he were doing some church rite. He could say to me, "Now, how about having some ice cream?" And when I say it, he would grow very serious and say, "Now, which cafe shall we patronize?" As though it were a very important thing. We would think for some time about it and finally say, "I think I'll go to negotiate the purchase with that shop." The world became a most exciting place. One day when I was in his ear, he said to me, "I have a great secret which I'm now going to tell you." I said, "It's really a secret?" At the moment, yes. He looked at me, I looked at him, and he looked at me. He said, "This is just between you and me. Remember, I am writing a poem." Oh, I was disappointed. He said, "But this is a different sort of poem. This is the greatest poem in the world." I whistled. He said, "I have been working on it for more than 5 years now. I will finish it in about 22 years from now. That is, if I keep on writing at the present rate." "You just write a lot then?" He said, "Not anymore. I just write 1 line a month. But I make sure it is a good line." I asked, "What was the month's good line?" He looked up at the sky and said, "The past is deep." I said, "It's a beautiful line." We also said, "I hope to distill the experiences of a whole month into the single line of a poetry. So in 22 years, I shall have written a poem that will sing to all humanity." I was filled with wonder. Our walks continued. We walked along the sea wall at dockside, and one day I said, "Mr. Wordsworth, if I drop this pen in the water, you think it will float?" He said, "It is a strange world. Drop your pen and let us see what happens." The pen sank. I said, "How is the poem this month?" But he never told me any other line. He merely said, "Oh, it comes, you know it comes." Oh, or we would sit on the sea wall and watch the liners come into the harbor. But for the greatest poem in the world, I heard no more. I felt he was growing older. "How you does live, Mr. Wordsworth?" I asked him one day. He said, "You mean how I get money?" When I nodded, he laughed in a crooked way. He said, "I sing calypsos in the calypso season, and that last you the rest of the year. It is enough. But you will be the richest man in the world when you write the greatest poem. He did not reply. One day when I went to see him in his little house, I found him lying on his little bed. He looked so old and so weak, and I found myself wanting to cry. He said the poem is not going well. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at me. He was looking through the window at the coconut tree, and he was speaking as though I was not there. He said, when I was 20, I felt the power within myself. Then almost in front of my eyes, I could see his face growing older and more tired. He said, but that was long time ago. And then I felt it so keenly. It was as though I had been slapped by my mother. I could see it clearly on his face. It was there for everyone to see. Death on the shrinking face. He looked at me, he saw my tears and sat up. He said, come. I went to sat on his knees. He looked into my eyes and said, oh, you can see it too. I always knew you had the poet's eye. He did not even look sad, and that made me burst out crying loudly. He pulled me to his thin chest and said, do you want me to tell you a fine story? And he smiled encouragingly at me, but I could not reply. He said, when I have finished this story, I want you to promise that you will go away and never come back to see me. Do you promise? I nodded. He said, good, well, listen, that story I told you about the boy poet and girl poet, do you remember that? That was not true. It was something I just made up. All this talk about poetry and the greatest poem in the world. That was not true either. It is not the funniest thing you have heard. But his voice broke. I left the house and ran home crying like a poet for everything I saw. Remember the first line, he said, you will cry for everything when you see anything, when you are a poet. Now he is a pure poet, he is crying for almost everything now. I walked along the Alberto Street a year later, but I could find no sign of the poet's house. It had not vanished, just like that. It had been pulled down, and a big two-storied building had taken its place. The mango tree and the palm tree and the coconut tree all had been cut down, and there were bricks and concrete everywhere. It was just as though Wordsworth had never existed. It seems like, just like his stories, just like the story of a lady poet and a man poet, Wordsworth is also an illusion for the writer. So here ends the story. It is the birth of a new poet, and the new poet is no one else, that is this writer himself when he was a boy. He was the boy who became poet.